No.
Ross?
Oh, Eric.
Yeah,
No.
I knew his name.
Okay. Okay, so first of all, the topic of today's conversation is going to be about mentally preparing ourselves for any event that's significant. So let's say I got a WhatsApp this morning, a message inviting me to a Super Bowl party, a kosher Super Bowl party next week, I guess. I'm really, at one point in my life, I followed football, but that's we're probably 50 years past that. So I understand the game to an extent. I've played, but I really don't know. I can't tell you anybody on the Kansas City Chiefs or the San Francisco 49ers, only that they also existed 50 years ago. I can't even tell you who the owners are.
Who's playing?
So if I'm going to go, either I'm going for the company and for the kosher food, but I probably would, in order for it to have some meaning to me, I would spend at least a half an hour figuring out a little bit about who's who, so that I can understand what's going on. It's not critical, but then the game is going to be absolutely meaningless to me. It's just about the party and the friendships, which is fine. But for the game to be meaningful to me, I would need to have to prepare. In life, for anything meaningful, we need to prepare. I performed a wedding ceremony last night, a chuppah. You have forethought. You don't just show up to a chuppah. And even though I know all the prayers, you have to prepare to make it meaningful to you, be able to make it meaningful, in this case, to others. So that's the conversation. We're going to take the conversation, get to this through the portal of the Torah portion, which is always the case. This week's Torah portion, we're going to read this from Shabbos. So now let's sort of go backwards. In the past 6 weeks, I guess, we opened up the second book of the Torah. There is the slavery and exodus from Egypt, splitting the sea. There's the freedom. God takes us to Sinai, because the whole point of it, taking us these Hebrews out of Egypt was to make them a people, a Jewish people, which happens at Sinai. That's what the Jewish community read yesterday. This coming week's Torah portion is now a smattering of laws, which makes sense. Got the Torah, then it starts talking to us about laws. A lot of these are civil laws. Then the Torah goes back at the very end of this coming week's Torah portion and talks about the Sinai situation, giving of the Torah. So in this week's Torah portion, I want to talk more about it now. We're going to flesh out more what's not obvious from the reading of the Torah, and because we just had a bunch of Christians, people believing in Christianity here a week ago, it's fresh in my mind. There are so many things in the Torah which are unintelligible unless we have the oral interpretation. You cannot. It's a mistake to see the Torah as the written law, and then later rabbis interpret it. Rabbis did interpret it, but before you get to rabbis interpreting, is what does that mean? That's a really important thing. Is what is the Torah telling us there? So when the Torah tells us that on Sukkot you take the fruit of a nice tree, it's not that the rabbis interpreted that to an esrog. Moses said it's an esrog. The rabbis tried to figure out if it's hinted at, and sometimes things were left more to our human analysis and coming to conclusions. But the Torah, so many of the verses it's impossible otherwise. One of the things, I don't want to spend too much time on this, the most blatant example is that the Torah says, Moses tells the Jews at the end of the Torah, says, now you're going to go into Israel, until now you've been only eating meat that has been brought as an offering in the tabernacle. When you come to Israel, you're going to want to have a steak, just because you want to have a steak. So then you have to make sure to slaughter the animal as I have commanded you. That's what it says. Now, but the thinking person will say, so where is it commanded? Nowhere in the Torah does God give any the slightest description of the way. We know there's slaughter. Now we know there's a right way. And now we know there's a way that was told to Moses, but it doesn't appear anywhere in the written law. If we look at the written law and say it came with a lot of oral interpretation, it starts to make sense. The chuppah I did last night, I had a letter because of the towels we were under, written in 1936, February 2nd, 1936. The groom's great grandparents giving his great grandparents giving to his great grandparents the talus. I saw names, I saw details. I had a card, but I needed the family to explain to me who's who, what's going on. The Torah is anchored. There's words that are critically important as an anchor, but the interpretation is equally as important. There are two parts of one important document: the written and the oral fleshing out. So we're going to get to that soon. First, I want to start on 1a. Excuse my congestion. Share screen. Okay.
Why is the whole section for robotic service? Are you trying to pass the message that you need to put a context and you need to prepare when you do your service?
Tell you what, let's go through texts 1 and 2, and then let me know if you have a question. Okay. Text 1a is from Isaiah. It says, God said, because this people approaches, with their mouth and with their lips they honor me. In other words, we approach God and we say, God, you're great, with our mouth and our lips. But with their heart they've drawn far away from me. And their fear of me has become a social obligation learned by rote. Isaiah back then is saying people come to synagogue, to services. They didn't have synagogues that way. People prayed. They say, God, you're great. But they're thinking about the Super Bowl. They say, oh, it's Shabbos, we can't do that. Because that's the way their grandparents told them. It's not a relationship. A relationship should be not just our tasks that we do, but that they're meaningful. Because we're in a relationship, and the relationship is meaningful. So God wants to be treated like a spouse. We come in and don't say, I love you on the way walking past. You look in the eye and say, I love you. Look at God and say, I'm not just coming here because it's Saturday morning. This is what I've done my entire life, or this is where my friends are because I have nothing else to do, and I'm going to say, I love you, God. And not even hear pretty much what I'm saying. It's getting into an emotional position. That's what Isaiah is complaining about. So text 1b, commentary on that Isaiah, famous, classic commentary called Metzudas David, says, for the people have approached me to draw near to me with the words of their mouth, to honor me with their lips, but they don't speak from the heart, but they distance their heart from me. Distance their heart from me doesn't mean they hate God or they're rebelling against God. They're thinking about lunch. They're thinking about business. They're thinking about, we all have things to take care of our minds. They take control of our minds. But when you're sitting at a romantic dinner with someone who's important to you, then you don't think about your business. You think about what the person in front of you. We can't see God, so it becomes more difficult, but God wants to be treated like something real. And in text 2a, this is from Psalms. I don't know if this is blocking it. Yeah, okay. It says, and they deceived him with their speech and lied to him with their words. This is from Psalms. The King David is saying about us, I deceived God. I lied to God. Their hearts are constant with him, and they were untrue to his covenant. It's a pretty harsh assessment. But if you look at text B, they deceived in King David means there was no wholeheartedness. If I say to someone, I love you, and I'm not thinking about it, I'm not feeling it, maybe because I in my head, maybe I do love them, but let it be, the words be an expression of a sentiment. They only sought to flatter God with their mouths, and they deceived him with their tongues. Again, that's from the classic commentary of the Tanakh, the stuff. So we have a problem. We have a problem of when we're not, we don't have concentration. We're not emotionally in gear. And we want to be able to be emotionally in gear with, obviously, with people and important relationships. But now we're talking about with God. So we want to be able to figure out how can we get more into gear. So now that we're going to go in with text 3, we're going to go on a journey into our Torah portion. So I want to zoom out and talk a little bit about the Torah and some of the things we're going to be talking about. Because, the Cecil B. DeMille version is, we went to Sinai, God gave us a Torah, and now it's in the Ark. It's not that simple. Number one, the Jews got the Torah 7 weeks after they came out of Egypt. The Torah, we have 40 years in the desert. And Moses completes the Torah. We have 40 years in the desert with things going on. We now, it is important for now also. If you remember, we once discussed in this class that the Torah only tells us about 1.5 years of events. The first 1.5 years of events of the desert. It skips about 38 something years, and then it goes to the end. It goes to the last few months. So we have the beginning and the middle. They were Jews. They were doing things, but there was nothing that God saw fit necessary to put into the Torah for posterity. The Torah is it's a book of lessons, not a book of history. So,
not a book of laws.
Lessons, laws, directions, instructions.
Instructions.
Oh yeah,
not lessons.
And lessons, absolutely. They're both. Lessons are instructions. Lessons are giving us lessons to do. Yeah, but it's not just lessons as in moral lessons. Absolutely, it's an instruction manual, but the instruction manual isn't only technical; it's also attitudinal. So the Torah could not. It's impossible, and no one in Torah thinking stages of 3,300 years thinks that Moses came down from Mount Sinai after 40 days up there. Remember, the first, as they're at Sinai, God speaks to the Jews, gives them 10 commandments. Moses goes up the mountain for 40 days, comes down with the Torah, comes down with 10 commandments, comes down with a lot of information. What's he doing up there for 40 days? He's absorbing the Torah. No one thinks that he came down with the Torah like we have in the Ark. It's impossible. The Torah we have in the Ark describes events that happened 40 years later. You think the Jews were sitting in the desert hearing about things that are going to happen, their own mistakes? No. That's not what happened. So Moses came down with 10 commandments, and he came down with something. What did he come down with? So let's just say to make it easier, because there's some discussion about it, it's Moses came down with Torah. The truth is, either Moses didn't come down with anything except the 10 commandments, or it came down with something written like from the beginning up until the Sinai experience. That's number one. Number two is that an attitude of looking at Torah, looking at scripture in general, because Torah is not a history book, it's an instruction manual. There are a few times in the Torah where, for the sake of the instruction, Torah gives up on the chronology. So it will give an instruction through the telling of a narrative, but it will tell you something later that actually happened earlier, because this is where the instruction matters. So Torah is not a chronological history book.
Do all the streams of the Judaism accept that what Moses came down from the mountain was up to the Sinai experience, or they believe that God gave them the whole thing?
I don't think anybody believes that.
Nobody believes that.
They gave the whole thing at Sinai?
Right.
No.
So did God give instructions to add next 40 years to the what Torah is?
We're going to talk about it, yeah. So This week's Torah portion. No, another wrinkle I want to put into that Cecil B. didn't come up with. The Jews in Egypt already, they had received, first of all humanity has 7 laws given to Noah, 7 mitzvahs given to Noah. Believe in God, don't blaspheme God, don't steal, don't kill, don't commit sexual immorality, don't kindness to animals, not against cruelty to animals, and to establish civil laws. There was bris, it's a mitzvah. We know about that since Abraham. There was not to eat a sinew of the loin. We know about that since Jacob, of the loin of an animal. The Jews come out of Egypt, and there's a splitting of the sea a week later. Shortly afterwards, the Torah told us, and we read this about this 2 weeks before, they come to a place called Mara, where they're thirsty. There, Moses talks to them about keeping the mitzvahs and the statutes. Which mitzvahs? They're 6 weeks before Sinai. He starts talking to them about keeping the mitzvahs. Chris? 7 mitzvahs? What are you talking about? Number 2, then, in the same Torah portion, Moses says in response to the Jews being unruly about food, Moses says it's going to be manna. And he tells them, Shabbos, you're not going to bring it in from the field. The Shabbos we don't carry outside. There's no laws of Shabbos. There's no Shabbos yet. He's talking to them about Shabbos. Shabbos is going to be given in 6 weeks. Where did that come up? So, what our Torah history is, which you can now understand within the narrative, but it's not clear in the Torah, is that when the Jews came out of Sinai, and they were after the splitting the sea, and they camped in Mara, Moses gave them a sampling of some of the mitzvahs in advance of Sinai. Shabbos, gave them an example of an irrational mitzvah, super rational mitzvah, not irrational, super rational mitzvah, the red heifer, honor your parents, a few things, a selection of a few different things to be able to give them a taste of other mitzvahs coming. So, the Sinai experience, to think that the Jews had no mitzvahs, they go up to Sinai and they got the whole Torah. First of all, they had some mitzvahs before. From Adam and Eve, from Noah, from Abraham, at Mara, and then they came and they got the official drama of it, and that was God speaking to them. But the documentation of it wasn't done until the end of 40 years. Okay, so now let's take a look at text 3, something in this week's Torah portion. Oh, I'm sorry.
When you said documentation, so after the Jews left for Holy Land from Sinai, it was codified. I thought it was codified like 800 years later.
The scripture that we have.
Yeah.
No.
When was it codified?
Torah said it was done at the day Moses died. It says atumam in the Hebrew, says completely done. It says the Torah at the end of the Torah.
It was codified.
What does codified mean?
In written papers, on paper.
Absolutely. That's the Torah. That's what the Torah says very clearly.
To respect our old argument about written Hebrew.
Yeah, so maybe archaeologists will catch up soon.
It wasn't that 200 years after it got created 200 years after the Jews.
I don't have a video of that time, nor do you.
Mm-hmm.
I will go with our text that our people have carried for 3,300 years, 3,300 plus years, and say that's what our ancestors. Put it this way: for this Torah to be passed to a generation after the desert, saying it was complete, when they lived in a time when it wasn't complete, Jews would have a perfect excuse not to keep Torah. I don't buy it. It makes no sense to me.
But it was God's will for generations to pass oral Torah from one generation.
Oral Torah, that's not this. Oral Torah. It's to me, it boggles the imagination to think that this is passed on generation to generation. And all Jews, and I don't want to get back into this now, it was so easy to blow a hole in this story of Sinai. No. If you talk about it in the years after they come out of the desert. Imagine the first year in Israel. So, Gennady is sitting there talking to a teacher, and say, 1 second, did this happen? So you go, it says all Jews were there. It's only 40 years. People are alive. Go ask your uncle, or your parents, or your grandparents. Say, were you standing there at Sinai? And you can say, by the way, guys, it's not true. It says all Jews. My grandparents were Jews. They weren't standing there.
But Moses going to God was at the beginning of the 40 years.
So
Only Jews that came to Sinai are not the same Jews that came from Egypt. Came from Sinai to Israel because the new generation.
No.
So you tell me the Egyptian Hebrews actually made it to the Holy Land.
Anyone under 20 could have.
40.
Or even some under 40. So what's no under 20? Someone who was 10 years old when they left Egypt would have been 50 years old. What's the problem?
And those days the lifespan was
someone 19 years old, someone 5 years old. Listen, again, if someone wants to believe it didn't happen, I don't mess with people's faith. But to me, I think that's such a huge leap of faith. People believe crazy things. I think that's a crazy thing.
I thought it was such an important dogma. Always said that the reason they stayed for 4 years, so the older generation who were slaves died off, and the younger generation that did not.
Only those above over 20. It's clear from the top.
Yeah.
So to me, it's I don't want to get into that. It's because we want to stick with this. It's we can have the conversation we've had a bunch of times. To me, to say that and you think that Christianity, they didn't like Jews, but somehow they to me they felt compelled to accept that Sinai happened. God gave the Torah to the Jews in public, all the Jews, and then changed his mind in private to Jesus on the road to Damascus. Believe whatever you want, but once you be original, create your own.
Well, Islam also says that.
So think to yourself: why do two religions who don't like Jews? Why do they feel compelled to accept the Sinai experience? Or if it was like someone sitting here and saying George Washington never existed. Maybe George Washington didn't exist. Maybe he's a fiction of the Revolutionary Army. Possible.
Do you know anyone who knew George?
You're right. It's possible. Go for it. But I'm saying I think we have more. I feel more confident that the Jews stood at Sinai than about George Washington. But I'm pretty confident about George Washington too. Okay, so or else they the municipality of Morristown is giving up good property, probably tax-free, for fiction. So these people wouldn't do that. Okay, text 3. So this is at the end of the Torah portion. God says, Moses, a hand up. Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, Rabbi, I just have a quick question. So, because I guess I was a little bit confused now, since I thought that all the laws or mitzvahs were given at one time point. So now I have a clarifying question.
Yeah.
And that is those mitzvahs that were associated specifically with the priesthood, the sacrifices, etc. Were they given to everybody at that point when the mitzvahs were given at Sinai, or they were so that everyone would study? It seems later on that specifically Aaron and his children are being trained. So it would seem that they did not get it at that time, right?
Right. So it's the one would think that almost all of the mitzvahs were told orally to Moses when he was on Mount Sinai. Some of them clearly from the Torah it was not, because there was something that there was laws of inheritance, and the daughters of Slavcha had asked Moses. He said, "Good question." He asked God, and God tells him that's in the 49th year. So it's some things clearly were not given then, but some things, even if they were given at Sinai, if they were told to Moses at Sinai, from the narrative you see that almost a year later God says, "Okay, this is what Aaron and his sons are going to do," like you just said, right? So that clearly wasn't. It didn't come, whether Moses knew it or what he taught it. It seems that was fresh information, and it definitely didn't become. It doesn't appear that's part of what was given. Now, whether the idea that Moses absorbed it all, or almost all, on Sinai, that is an idea that we have, because the fact is they were doing offerings, so we have to know something about it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the end of the Torah portion, text 3, it says, "And to Moses God said, come up to God, you and Aaron, Nadav and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and prostrate yourselves from afar. And Moses alone shall approach God, but they shall not approach, and the people shall not ascend with him." So Moses came and told the people all the words of God and all the ordinances, and all the people answered in unison and said, "All the words that God has spoken we will do." And Moses wrote all the words of God, and he rose early in the morning, built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 monuments for the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so on the one hand, this seems like he says, Moses alone shall approach God. That sounds like it's when Moses is coming up the mountain. So it sounds like pre-Sinai. On the other hand, it says he told the people all the words of God and all the ordinances. Well, he didn't have it pre-Sinai. We had some. So it sounds like post-Sinai. So there's confusion about this. How are we supposed to read this? As something that's telling us about an event pre-Sinai or post? Now, I wish they had brought in here verse 7 of this chapter 24, because it is important. I think it was a mistake that they didn't. It says in this week's Torah portion, Moses took the book of the covenant and he read it for them. There was a book. What's the book of the covenant? I know a Torah. Maybe you figure the book of the covenant must be the Torah. The book, Sefer HaBris, the book of the covenant. What is that? So now let's get to text 4. This is from a great Spanish rabbi, Don Yitzchak Abravanel, text 4. The commentators disagree regarding when the events described here occurred. The sages of France, he means Rashi, primary commentary in the Torah, and his school of thought, assert that this occurred before the giving of the Torah. So even though we read about the giving of the Torah yesterday, and this is in the coming week, the Torah filled in important information after giving us a smattering of laws. It tacks it on the end of this week's Torah portion to tell us about something that happened before the giving of the Torah, because the Torah doesn't always go in chronological order. When Moses separated the people, he told the people to prepare themselves for going to Sinai. While the sages of Spain, and he means here Nachmanides or Parnell, maintain that this happened after the giving of the Torah, as they chronologically appear in the Torah. Not that they felt it has to be it's a Talmudic axiom. You don't know, it's not always chronologically in order. They were just trying to understand the flow. And as we see Rashi as being the French school, to Moses, God said this, and Rashi says very clearly in the Torah portion, this portion was spoken prior to the 10 Commandments. Moses was told on the 4th day of Sivan, which is right before Shavuos in today's day, to ascend, to come to the mountain. So before he went to the mountain, God told him to go through all these hoops. Now, what does it mean and all the ordinances? So this is before Sinai. What's he talking about? All the ordinances. What does the Torah mean that what was Moses teaching? These are the 7 Noahide laws: keeping Shabbos, honoring your father and mother, the red heifer, and the laws that were given to them at Mar. They said a few other things that were given to them at Mar. Mar is that place where they came after the splitting of the sea, where I told you that's where Moses speaks to them. It's a week after Sinai, but he's already talking about mitzvahs. So he taught them mitzvahs at that stage. And in text 5c, Rashi tells us what does it mean? He wrote that he wrote down for them there in what Rashi is calling the Sefer HaBris, the Book of the Covenant. He wrote the mitzvahs from the beginning of Genesis until the giving of the Torah. He also wrote the commandments that were commanded in law. So the way Rashi is explaining it, and it's not the only way to explain it, he's saying that Moses before Sinai, he gathered together these people, and he wrote down what's called the Sefer HaBris, this Book of the Covenant, and what do you have on it? It seems like almost like a mini Torah, part of a Torah that he this is what he read, which is itself kind of quizzical, curious. So let's put it that way. So now let's get into the meat of how was the Torah given. And there's a debate in the Talmud. 6a. Rabbi Yochanan, great rabbi of the Talmud, of the Mishnah, said in the name of Rabbi Noah, the Torah was given in sections, scroll by scroll. As it is stated, then I said, behold, I come in the scroll of the book, it is written concerning me. What does Rabbi Yochanan say? Great Talmudic rabbi. He says that Moses wants to give the Jews a Torah. So now he's at Sinai, he's got a lot of information, turns to God, because he's not writing on his own. It says very clearly that it was at God's instruction. He was just transcribing for God. So now what he does is he creates a scroll. Here's from creation, from Genesis up till here. God dictates, he writes, he has a scroll. Comes later, as Gennady said, the time to open the tabernacle. God says, "Go, Moses. These are the laws I want you to tell Aaron and his sons." He writes a scroll, whatever. We don't know exactly which. He writes a bunch of scrolls as things happen, as God tells him, because he's just a transcriber. At the end of his life, God says, "Now we're done. Take these scrolls and make them into one scroll." So it was written piecemeal. But it's Moses, very carefully. But then there's another one, Shimon ben Lakish. He said the Torah was given complete and sealed, as take this book of the law. He says, no. Torah was written at the end of Moses' life. Until then, everything was oral. We have what we call the oral interpretation. That's what I'm talking about. Talking about Bereshis bara Elokim, the beginning of God's creation, the very first words of the Torah. That's what Moses taught to them also. The words, what we call today the written Torah, that was passed on orally. Maybe Moses had notes for himself, perhaps, but it was not as a Torah, as a document, until it was all in one shot. Now, what does that mean? Torah was given section by section. So Rashi, this is in the Talmud. Rashi in the Talmud explains. What is section by section? When a portion was spoken to Moses, he would write it down. He didn't do it. Say it again.
Don't you have to go? Oh, never mind.
Yeah. Torah was given section by section. When a portion was spoken to Moses, he would write it down. At the end of whenever God speaks to him, okay, God, is this supposed to go into the final document? Yes? Okay. And he writes it down exactly. At the end of the 40 years, when all the portions are completed, he connected them with threads and seal. That's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. What is Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish's opinion? It was given complete and sealed. It was not written until the end of the 40 years after all the sections were spoken to. Those were spoken in the first and second years. As we say, the Torah goes first and second years to the 40th year. And what were they done? They were transmitted orally until they wrote them down. Okay. So that is the way Rashi explains it. So what's the book of the covenant? The book of the covenant from this perspective and it could only be according to this opinion that it was written in piecemeal. It was that piecemeal idea. from until that time. But now if you look at text 7, commentary on the Talmud, primary commentary, Rashi's grandchildren primarily, who continued this for a couple of hundred years after Rashi passed away. And a piece of Talmud has a Talmud in the middle, Rashi on the inside, and this called Tosafot, which is additions from the next couple of generations on the other side, on the outside. Torah was given complete and sealed. How could this be? So 1 second though. How can this be? How does this all make sense? If you say that the Torah was written in pieces, okay, so that was the book of the covenant. But what about the guy, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, who's as great a rabbi as Rabbi Yochanan? He says it was given at the end. There was nothing written. What was the book of the covenant? And Tosafos asks, the Torah was given complete and sealed. How could this be? Scripture states explicitly, he took the book of the covenant and read it in the ears of the people. And Rashi explains that that this means from Genesis until this point. So what could be the meaning of that everything was done at the end when we know clearly that there was some kind of a book? So in text 8, we find a great Spanish rabbi, Rajba. He says, even according to Reish Lakish, that's Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, he only meant that Moses did not write every portion as it was spoken to. Rather, he orally transmitted it in order until the completion of the Torah. But still, those sections that were necessary at the time, for whatever reason, were written down, so they can be seen and learned from the written text. So this great rabbi says it's not that Talmudic authority or the Shlakish is not saying that nothing was written. They were written according to what God said to write. He did write if it was necessary. So there was some kind of a book that he was able to present to the Jews before Sinai and talk to them about it. So mitzvahs. Take this a little later in history. The great Maharal, who created the Golem, says, according to the opinion, I hope everyone's, if there are any questions, please let me know. Actually, so let me go back up there for a second. What's the text line? Okay. According to the opinion that maintains that the Torah was given complete and sealed, that is limited to the Torah scroll as a whole. Over here, this wasn't about giving over the Torah, but rather an independent book of the covenant, as explained in the Mendy. Indeed, later, at the conclusion of 40 years, the entire Torah was recorded. The Maharal, Rabbi Yehuda, is saying, you're confusing two things. Torah, like in the Ark, that was completed according to that rabbinic opinion, Talmudic opinion, at the end of 40 years. But that's not the only thing. God gave instructions, sometimes to write something that wasn't a Torah. There were other scrolls. There was ink and parchment that there's not only for Torah scrolls. For example, he's going to say, the Torah itself says that someone who's accused of adultery, they would write a piece of the Torah called the Sota on a parchment, the way it's written in the Torah, and they would scrape it off into water. It was, even though you're not allowed to erase God's name, but in order to restore trust between the husband and wife, we go through this process. It was a miraculous process where they would scrape it off and it would go into water and they would drink the water. But what he's saying, you're allowed to write something. He didn't give the whole Torah, but you're allowed to write Torah stuff. Just think about it. Would our allegiance to the notion of Torah is given complete and sealed hold us back from writing out the scroll for a Sota? Of course not. It's an independent mitzvah defined by writing those verses. Here as well, the mitzvah was defined by writing down these particular verses. Do I have to go further? Yeah. Okay. If there was no explicit instruction from God to do so, and Moshe went ahead and wrote this scroll, it would need to be troubling. To think that Moses on his own wrote things that got mixed into God's Torah, that's dangerous. But the idea is God spoke to us at Sinai, taught in front of the entire people, and said, I am speaking to you in front of the people so that people know that you're not doing this on your own and they can trust whatever you give them. And that's what appears in the Torah. Those words appear in the Torah. So we know Moses is a faithful servant. Moses is not writing on his own. Wasn't the case. For God did give such an instruction. There's no question at all. So God gave us the Torah, and God said, write this also. There is a Sefer HaBris. What was the Sefer HaBris? The Book of the Covenant. It says there were the mitzvahs, certain mitzvahs that he gave to the Jews in advance. So now the Jews, let's recap this. The Jews come out of Egypt. They know about monotheism, they know about Bris, they know about Abraham and Sarah, they know about Yitzchak and Rivka to the extent they know. Now, they know some mitzvahs. They cross the Red Sea. They are now done with the Egyptians. They now focus on going to Sinai, and Sinai is not just about getting an instruction manual. Sinai was a chuppah between us and God. It was going to be a very special, powerful event. Now, part of that would be that any relationship has its understanding of rules for a relationship, but this was going to be a very, very powerful connection between us and God, and it would metamorphosize us from the Hebrews to the Jewish nation. As part of that, in Moses, we're told, says, we have this thing that we read this week's Torah portion. Moses took out and read for them the Book of the Covenant. What was the Book of the Covenant? It wasn't the Torah, but it was what he wrote down for them and say, this is a smattering of the mitzvahs. I want you to understand what you're going for. Now, why do you have to do that? Let them wait 6 weeks. Look at it all. So, and it's interesting that it's called Sefer HaBris. It's not a Sefer of Torah. It's a book of covenant. What's a covenant? And in their translation in 10, for some reason, they translated covenant as treaty. I don't think that's good at all. A treaty is, we think of it in English, I think a treaty is a treaty between warring nations, maybe. Or maybe nations who are disagreeing, so you come up with an agreement. A covenant, in the Torah idea of what's a bris? A bris is a cementing a deep super-rational relationship. Maybe what we call we're blood brothers. Where it's when standing under chuppah. Standing under chuppah, the parties are saying we're not just best friends. We're not just roommates. We have something that we will fight for, even when you wake up in the morning and say, I don't know if this is working. That it's a relationship above. So it doesn't just say Moses read from a book of Torah. It's called Sefer HaBris, the book of a covenant. So take a look at this from text 10 was from the Rebbe. The idea of a covenant, because I think it's a big mistake to use the word treaty here. It just doesn't bring
Contract?
It's a contract, but a contract is also contract doesn't tell you anything emotional. I have a contract with my landscaper. A covenant is about concretizing a deep, super rational element of relationship, where even if it's not going to work, if I don't like my landscaper, I have no problem saying we're done. When a covenant with someone saying, I love you, but something's bothering me. Why don't you just say we're done and try to find something? So because I don't want, this is not a disposable relationship. That's a covenant.
You're making a comparison to Kupa. The Book of Covenant should be compared to Ketubah.
Exactly. Well, the Torah is compared to a ketubah.
Torah is compared to Ketubah. But the Book of Covenant is a subset of Torah. Right?
It's not a subset of Torah. It's not just a different iteration of Torah. It's separate, but you're going in the right direction. Let's look at this. What the Rebbe is saying is the idea of a covenant is to fortify the connection and bond between the two parties entering the covenant, which in our case are God and the Jewish people. Through the God-given Torah, we're able to connect with God. As such, in light of Rashi's opinion that the treaty was before the Torah was given, the covenant was regarding whatever God had instructed the Jewish people beforehand. The purpose of this treaty was as a preparation, introduction to the giving of the Torah. It was a covenant, a pre-covenant covenant. It was in preparation. He says correct. He's saying, you got to get your mind into gear. I'm going to give you, there's going to be mitzvahs. This is a relationship with God. And you have to see this as not just a to-do list from your divine creator. This is about a relationship. Get into that mindset. This is a warm-up for the covenant idea.
Preamble.
But it's an emotional one. We can't, in the Chabad world. Actually, I say this to people all the time. They talk about coming for services. You can't hope, in my opinion, a normal human being can't hope to just walk into the synagogue from the outside world, sit down, open a book, and be inspired. It doesn't. It's not going to work. It's not. It can't really. So one of the reasons, as the Talmud tells us, that we should have two doorways, like we have here, two doorways before you walk into a synagogue. That's what the Talmud describes. So that's architectural advice. Is because one doorway is a meditative process of walking out of your prior mindset, unshackling yourself from all the stuff that you were thinking about. And then you're ready to enter the next doorway into the door of prayer. But it's not easy. We have busy minds. In yeshiva, growing up, and it's still like that, in Chabad yeshivas, they're a study for an hour and a half, pre-prayer, every single day, of Hasidic thoughts, but about God, and going to the mikveh. And then you say, now you can start praying. Because now you can start opening the book because you put your mind in the right place. Moses doesn't want, God doesn't want the Jews to just show up at Sinai and say, okay, now what? He's getting them going.
You have to come on time.
Yeah, but it's about the relationship part of it. Saying words are saying words. It's about getting into gear and connecting with God.
So part of Book of Covenant is in Torah, and part of Book of Covenant, which is not in Torah, is the instructions to prepare for Torah.
We can't be sure what was in the Book of Covenant.
The copy, nobody will have the copy.
No, because it wasn't necessary for posterity. So we have the Torah. Whatever was necessary to be in Torah, it was put into the Torah.
So all didn't the cat have a bunch of little books there for sale? Did he keep the copy of Covenant?
So let's go to text 11. Let's talk about preparation. It is necessary to prepare one's mind for performing any mitzvah, as well as before uttering any blessing, especially before mentioning the revered name of God. If one were to perform such acts suddenly without prior intention, the act would be invalidated to the missing intention, which is like a body without a soul. If you think about it, an observant Jew makes blessings all day. Every time you eat, it is normal to just say it as a formula. I made a blessing before I had this tea. I got to tell you, I was thinking about setting up the Zoom. The blessing comes. It's like saying I love you on the way out and thinking about the business meeting, not meaning it. So before a blessing, so we have to prepare. We have to get into an emotional place. God's statement through the prophet Isaiah is well known, because this people approaches me and their fear of me has become a social obligation learned by rote, which we've read before. So one must invest emotional energy to perform any mitzvah before every prayer and blessing. What is this commandment? What is the reason for it? How and what manner should it be performed? And one should prepare and arouse their soul to perform it with all love and great joy in such a way that the mitzvah will rise up before God in a pleasing way. If you're doing mitzvahs in the course of the day, this really adds a lot to your day. You can't not just do it. Think about it. What is this? Why is this? What is this? What does this mean in the cosmos? And that's part of the blessing. We have to stop. Don't just do it. It should be not just words, but a meditation. So again, here they're bringing this to understand about the preparation Moses wanted them to have with the covenant before they come and they have the real covenant, the ketubah. Oh, I'm sorry. So you can read this. I read that a little too quickly. I didn't realize that was the second one. Okay. Text 12. The reason why our sages stated that one should recite a blessing before performing a mitzvah is to first sanctify ourselves with the blessing. This way it becomes demonstrably evident that we're performing the mitzvah because of God's command. One of the points of a blessing is not so much that God needs to hear our blessing. I'm about to put up a mezuzah. Thank you, God, for the mitzvah of mezuzah. What God needs is our consciousness. And it tells me that even though I have the mezuzah and I have a hammer and nails, I have to take a second. I have words to say. Why? Because I have thoughts to think. It's not just about saying a formula. It's feelings to feel. So let's take a look here. Text 13. Actually, before we go there. Every year, we put up a sukkah. I have one here, I have it in my house. So even though usually I leave that the heavy lifting for my boys, but I always want to be involved. And it is a mitzvah to be involved. I shouldn't say it's a mitzvah. It is praiseworthy to be involved in preparing for a mitzvah. My wife lights Shabbos candles. The advice of the Talmud is that the man in the house should prepare the candles for her to light. So we're part of the preparation for the mitzvah. So what happens? Running to Home Depot to get zip ties or whatever I got to do before to putting up the sukkah. It's important. I don't resent it, but the mitzvah of sukkah, according to the way we see Jewish law, is when we sit there at night, or starting from sukkahs for the 7-8 days of sukkahs, and we use the sukkah. And we say the mitzvah is to dwell in the sukkah. We make a bracha, we eat in there, we sit with friends in there, whatever we use, the little nesrig in there. We have two Talmuds, the Jerusalem Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is the one that's more developed, and that is the one that determines Jewish law. The Jerusalem version of the Talmud is studied and very well respected, but if there's a difference between the two, we go with the Babylonian. Jerusalem Talmud states an interesting thing. It said when making a sukkah, not when you sit in a sukkah, not when you eat in a sukkah, when you build a sukkah, recite the blessing, blessed are you who commanded us to make a sukkah. Now there is no, in the verbiage of the Torah, there's no mitzvah build a sukkah. Obviously, we're supposed to dwell in sukkah, so you got to build it first. But the Jerusalem Talmud derives from it that there's a mitzvah in the preparation. When you assemble a lulav and put together a lulav, the truth is, think, if I could buy it totally put together, it's easier for me. But no, Jerusalem Talmud says it's a mitzvah. Recite the blessing, blessed are you who commanded us to make a lulav. So whereas in our practice now, our preparations are the blessings, in the opinion of the Jerusalem Talmud, the preparation, the physical preparation for a mitzvah was so important that you can make a bracha on that too. It's its own mitzvah. The preparation is its own mitzvah. So if I'm going to Brooklyn to pick up mezuzahs for my house, going to Brooklyn it's a necessary preparation. I can't stand going across the Hudson, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to come back, and now I got come to the mitzvah to put up a mezuzah. Jerusalem Talmud says no. The preparation itself, the trip to Brooklyn itself is holy because you have the prelude to the mitzvah, to a special covenant. There's a covenant before the covenant. Anytime we're doing something important. Number 14a. There's a great rabbi, Rabbi Shimon Sofer, who was also a mohel. He did circumcisions. And if he had a bris on a Sunday, he would get up early and he would study and he would pray and he would meditate and he would check his knife and he would do everything, and then he was ready for the bris. So there was no such thing as a Sunday morning bris with lox and bagels, because he was not going to be ready in the morning. He couldn't get himself into gear. He needed the time. Now, one thing that I mentioned before, because it's going to come here, even the Talmud says, I told you that in Chabad Yeshivas, we study for an hour and a half before prayer. The Talmud talks about pious ones in times of the Talmud, who they call Hasidim, but they don't mean Hasidim like today's Hasidim, but that's the language. It's Hasidim, these pious ones. Pious ones would spend an hour in meditation before prayer and an hour meditation after prayer to concretize the feelings and to make them moving. But talking about the preparation part. So now back to Rabbi Shimon Sofer, people gave him a hard time. So he wrote this thing. The Talmud relates that in generations past, the pious ones would prepare for an entire hour before prayers. If that was the case back then, certainly in certain times when our emotional capacity is greatly diminished, we must take the time for every mitzvah to rouse our hearts toward God. After all, every mitzvah requires emotional investment. There have been some rabble rousers in our community who raised the alarm about my practice of delaying the mitzvah of milah. He wrote this letter to another rabbi asking. No, actually, no, this is a rabbi who wrote to Shimon Sofer. This is the rabbi, Shimon Sofer was not the male. The male wrote to Rabbi Shimon Sofer. There have been some, they're up to no good, and they certainly do not have any holy intentions in mind. I made an official inquiry with the elders of our community. They answered that there's obviously no halakha concern vis-a-vis the notion of make sure to do a mitzvah as early as possible, because it is a Torah value to do a mitzvah as early as possible. People are coming saying, I want a morning bris, and by the way, Torah says we're supposed to do it early. So what kind of rabbi are you that you want to do only an afternoon bris? As you'll see in their words, to silence all of the dissenters, I figured I would inquire after the matter with the great people of the generation. So he wrote to Rav Shimon Sofer. And he responds, I received your letter yesterday on Shabbat. I have rushed today to answer and remove any anguish from your pure. Yes, it is true. Anyone who delays a mitzvah so as to perform it more properly is to be praised and is considered the earliest and performed with utmost alacrity. You're going to bring a surprise gift to a loved one, do it right. More importantly than doing it quickly. Do it right. Make sure it's going to have impact. And therefore, what Rav Shimon Sofer said is, this is all about the preparation. Not all about the preparation is so important for the end product. And that's why when it comes to this event, pre-Sinai, about that was said Moses took the book of the covenant, and he read for them in the book of the covenant. What does the Medrash say on that verse? God said to them, now you are tied with knotted ropes. Means you are connected to me. God says to the Jews, now because you had this covenant, there's this super rational connection, bound fast. Tomorrow and come, accept upon yourselves all the commandments. In other words, Moses reading them. Oops, upset. Oh, I missed all this. I'm sorry.
100.
So you know something for everybody online? You heard me reading it, but now you read it yourselves. This is the letter to Shimon Sofer. So I was thinking about that too. He didn't open it on Shabbos; it came on Shabbos. So, but the idea is that this this episode that we're going to read about this coming week shows us that Moses wanted to get the Jews into emotional gear, warm them up for this chuppah, and that's why he wrote, with God's permission, this book of the covenant, which we don't have. But what he did was he gave them a feeling for what the mitzvahs would be, and the idea of this relationship that they're entering into with God, to the extent that God said to them now, even though it's 6 weeks before Sinai, with this, you're tied to me with knotted ropes, bound fast. So we'll go to the key points. We are enjoined to be emotionally invested in our mindset and not do them robotically. Number 2, there are 2 narratives documented in the Torah surrounding the events of Matan Torah. Matan Torah means the giving of the Torah. One in Yitro, the other later in Mishpatim. Commentaries, debate of the events in Mishpatim are just an expanded version of what happened and what we read yesterday, Sinai experience. They occurred before the Torah was given, or if they're really separate events that occurred thereafter. Next one. According to the first opinion, the Jewish people composed a unique Sefer HaBrit, or Moses composed the unique Sefer Habitas, the book of the covenant, even before the Torah was given, as a preparatory step to enhance their emotional investment. That's that's misworded. It's not the Jewish people composed. Moses composed. Preparing for a mitzvah is a serious process with legal halachic weight. And finally, Hasidic thought and lifestyle places much emphasis on this process. So, I don't know if there are any questions.
Section is so full of information. For 1 hour, it's just impossible to grasp it. I'm sure everyone has hundreds of questions. Leon probably has questions.
Leon, Gennady says you probably have a question.
No, I'm sorry, not the specific question.
Okay, I'm just passing it on. Okay, so if there are not, wish you all a good week. See you next week, God willing. Have a good one.
Feel better, Rabbi.
I'm feeling fine. It's just congestion. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.